Belinda Michael did not plan to fall in love with a man who owned 3 nightclubs, 2 shell companies, and 1 very dangerous smile. She did not plan any of it. What she planned that Tuesday morning was simple. Wake up, brew coffee, submit her fashion design portfolio to the internship panel at Han & Co. Textiles before the 9 a.m. deadline. That was the entire plan. 4 steps, clean, achievable. Absolutely nothing about it involved a black SUV with tinted windows, a man who smelled like cedar and bad decisions, or the moment her entire carefully organized life flipped upside down and somehow landed better than it started. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. It started with the coffee. Belinda had one of those pour-over setups that took exactly 7 minutes if you did it right. She was on minute 4, standing in her tiny Seoul apartment in her oversized Lagos University hoodie, her locks pulled up into a messy bun that had given up on itself sometime around 3 a.m. She had been up until 3 a.m. because the last page of her portfolio kept printing slightly off-center, and Belinda Michael did not submit slightly off-center work. She had reprinted it 11 times. 11. Her roommate Said had walked past her at 2:47 a.m., looked at the stack of paper on the floor, looked at Belinda, and walked back to bed without saying a single word. That was the kind of friendship that sustained a person. The coffee was almost ready. The portfolio was in her tote bag. The tote bag was by the door. Belinda was, for the first time in 16 hours, breathing. Then her phone rang. It was her cousin Precious, which was never a good sign at 8:03 in the morning because Precious only called before noon when something had gone wrong or when she needed something, and the two were usually the same event. Billy, I'm literally about to walk out the door. I know, quick thing. Precious. You know Park Jisoo, the one I've been seeing. Belinda knew Park Jisoo. Everyone in their circle knew Park Jisoo, not because he was a bad person, but because Precious introduced him approximately once a week as if they had just met. The accountant. He's not just an accountant. Precious, I have 9 minutes. He got me a ticket to the Han & Co. showcase tonight, the private one, the one where they announce the internship results in person. A pause. But I can't go. Why not? I have a situation. What kind of situation? The kind involving Park Jisoo's mother and a misunderstanding about a dinner reservation, and I really cannot explain it right now, but Billy, I need you to go. You're already submitting your portfolio today. It makes sense. You go, you represent yourself, you collect whatever good news is coming, and you look amazing doing it. Belinda looked down at herself. Oversized hoodie, pajama shorts. 1 sock. I need to change. You have 8 minutes. She made it in 6. The showcase venue was a sleek building in Gangnam that looked like someone had designed it by stacking glass boxes on top of each other and calling it architecture. Belinda arrived 7 minutes before the event opened, portfolio tucked under her arm, wearing the green wrap dress she kept for occasions that required her to look like she had her life together. She had her life together. Mostly. The dress helped. The lobby was already filling with designers, portfolio cases, and the particular kind of nervous energy that collected in rooms where careers were about to be decided. Belinda found a spot near the exhibit wall, studied the framed textile samples, and tried to look like she belonged, which she did. But imposter syndrome had never once cared about the truth. She was looking at a deep indigo bolt sample when someone stepped beside her and also looked at it. And the first thing she noticed was that he was tall, which was not unusual. And the second thing she noticed was that he was not carrying a portfolio, which was unusual because everyone in this room was carrying a portfolio. And the third thing she noticed when she glanced sideways was that he was wearing a suit that cost more than 3 months of her rent, and looking at the textile sample with the focused expression of a man who actually understood what he was looking at. He was Korean, sharp-jawed, dark-haired, with the kind of face that would have been almost unbearably handsome if it weren't for the small scar near his left eyebrow that made him look like he had survived something and decided to keep going anyway. There was something about him that Belinda's instincts flagged immediately, the same instinct that had kept her safe moving to Seoul alone at 23. It was not fear exactly. It was awareness. The awareness you felt standing near something powerful. The dye layering on this one is wrong. She turned. He was still looking at the sample. Sorry. The indigo, the top layer was applied before the base had fully set. You can see the bleeding at the edges if you look close. He tilted his head slightly. Whoever approved this for display either didn't notice or didn't care. Belinda looked at the sample again. He was right. She had noticed it too, but assumed she was being overly critical. You know textiles? He looked at her then fully, and something about the directness of it made her want to take a small step back. She didn't. My family is in the industry. Han & Co.? A very small smile. Adjacent. Before she could ask what adjacent meant, a Han & Co. representative materialized beside them with the panicked energy of someone who had just found a celebrity in the wrong section of an event. The representative said something quickly in Korean, and the man responded in a low, even voice that made the representative immediately relax and step back, which was a fascinating sequence of events that Belinda filed away. You speak Korean, he said it like an observation, having apparently noticed her following the exchange. I've been here 2 years, you pick it up. Where are you from originally? Nigeria, Lagos. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, more like recognition, as if a small thing had clicked into place. The textile tradition there is extraordinary, a so oak, Ankara, the resist-dyeing techniques. There are masters in Lagos who have been doing what this industry is trying to market as innovation for 300 years. Belinda stared at him. What? A slight defensiveness entered his voice, which was the first thing about him that seemed remotely human. Nothing, I just wasn't expecting that. You assumed I wouldn't know. I assumed most people in this building wouldn't know. The event coordinator stepped to the podium, and the room's attention shifted, and Belinda turned toward the front, and she thought that would be the end of it. A brief, interesting exchange with a well-dressed man who knew more about West African textiles than expected. Fine. Good. Moving on. Except he stayed beside her for the entire presentation. He didn't say anything else. He just stood there, close enough that she was occasionally aware of him. And when the coordinator announced the shortlisted names for the Han & Co. internship, and Belinda Michael was third on the list, she heard a quiet sound beside her that might have been approval. She did not see him when she went to collect her shortlist notification card. She told herself she wasn't looking. She was a little bit looking. His name, she would find out 3 days later in the most inconvenient way possible, was Jeon Hyunwoo, and he was not adjacent to Han & Co. He owned it. The letter arrived on a Thursday. Official Han & Co. letterhead, her full name typed in clean sans serif, the language formal and careful and essentially saying congratulations. You have been selected for the final round of interviews. Please report to Han & Co. Headquarters on Monday at 10 a.m. and dress appropriately. Belinda read it 4 times. She sent a photo to her mother in Lagos, who responded with 17 praise emojis and a voice note that was mostly shouting. She sent it to Said, who read it, looked up, and said, I told you reprinting that portfolio 11 times would pay off. Which was not what she had said at 2:47 a.m., but Belinda let it go. She spent the weekend preparing. Interview clothes, company research. She pulled up everything she could find on Han & Co. textiles, which was a substantial amount because it was one of the largest textile conglomerates in East Asia, founded 30 years ago by a man named Jeon Hyunwoo, currently chaired by his son. The photo on the company website made her set down her phone. She picked it back up, sharp jaw, dark hair, small scar near the left eyebrow. Oh no, Belinda said to her empty apartment. Said appeared in the doorway. What? Belinda turned the phone around. Said looked at the screen. Wait, is that the man from the showcase? It would appear so. He owns the company you're interviewing at. It would appear so. Belinda, I know, you thought he was a regular person. In my defense, he was standing at a textile exhibit, looking at dye samples like a regular person. Rich people do regular people things sometimes, Billy. That's literally how they blend in. That is not helpful information right now. What are you going to do? Belinda looked at the photo again. At the bio beneath it. Jeon Hyunwoo, chairman, 2nd generation, 42 years old, no further personal information provided. She looked at the interview letter. She looked back at the phone. I'm going to the interview, she said. What else would I do? Monday arrived. The Han & Co. headquarters building was not in Gangnam. It was in a quieter part of the city, older architecture, the kind of building that had been expensive for so long it no longer needed to announce it. Belinda walked in at 9:52 a.m. wearing her best structured blazer, her locks pinned into a low style, portfolio in hand, heart rate professionally managed. She was shown to a waiting room with 4 other candidates, all Korean, all looking at her with the kind of polite curiosity that Belinda had learned to return with a calm smile, the smile that said, I see you looking, and I am not moving. She was the only black woman in the room. She was also, based on a completely objective assessment of the portfolio samples visible on everyone's laps, one of the strongest designers in the room. She had made peace with holding both of those things at once. The interviews were called one at a time. Belinda was last. She waited 40 minutes. She read the room. She observed everything. The building had older bones but newer nervous system, security cameras at precise intervals, staff who moved with a certain efficiency that went beyond corporate training, like people who had learned to be good at more than one kind of job. The receptionist had the posture of someone who had trained for something other than reception. Belinda noticed these things. She filed them away. When her name was called, she was shown to a conference room on the 4th floor, and she walked in expecting a panel, the way these things usually went, 3 or 4 people with clipboards and standardized questions. There was one person in the room. Jeon Hyunwoo looked up from the folder in front of him. He looked at her with the same directness he had at the showcase, and she looked back with the same stillness she had then, and for exactly 3 seconds neither of them acknowledged that they had already met. "Miss Michael, Mr. Jeon, please sit." She sat. He opened the folder, which she could see contained a printed copy of her portfolio submission. He had already been through it. There were small pencil marks on 2 of the pages. "Your textile fusion concepts," he said. "The Aso-oak weave structure married to Korean pajagi patchwork." He turned one of the pages. "Where did this come from?" Both traditions share a philosophy about repurposing fabric. Nothing is wasted. Leftover pieces are considered part of the whole. I wanted to see what happened when I put the 2 in conversation. He looked up from the page. "And what happened?" "You're looking at it." Something moved across his face. Not the small smile from the showcase. Something quieter. The interview lasted 57 minutes. He asked real questions. She gave real answers. At no point did either of them mention the showcase, the textile sample, the scar, the suit, the voice that had made the event coordinator relax. It was as if that evening existed in a different folder entirely, and they had both agreed to keep it closed. At the end, he closed her portfolio and said, "You'll hear from us by Wednesday." "Thank you for your time." She stood. She shook his hand, professional, clean, fine. She was almost to the door when he said, "The pajagi concept, the 3rd sketch. What fabric weight were you imagining for the stitched panels?" She turned. "Medium weight. Enough structure to hold the form, but light enough that it moves." "Good." She left. In the elevator, she exhaled. Said was waiting at home with jollof rice and a completely unnecessary amount of questions. Belinda answered what she could, which was not much, because a significant portion of her mental energy was occupied by the question of why a man who owned a multinational textile company had conducted her interview himself. Wednesday came. The letter said, "You have been selected." The internship started the 1st Monday of the following month. Belinda arrived early. She was assigned to the design development team on the 3rd floor, which was populated by 7 other designers, a team lead named Ha-yoon who had the energy of someone who genuinely loved what she did, and a project board that made Belinda's creative instincts immediately start running. The 1st week was good. The 2nd week was better. She was fast, specific, and her Afro-Korean fusion concepts were generating real excitement within the team. Ha-yoon had presented one of Belinda's pattern concepts in a department meeting and come back glowing. In the first 2 weeks, she saw Jeon Hyunwoo exactly once. He walked through the floor briefly on a Wednesday, spoke to the project director, did not look in her direction, and left. This was fine. This was correct. He was the chairman. She was an intern. The distance was professional and appropriate, and she was not thinking about it. She said this to Said on the phone that Wednesday night. "You're thinking about it." "I am not." "You literally just spent 4 minutes describing the exact direction he was walking and the fact that he didn't look at you. That's a description of someone you're thinking about." "I was providing context." "Billy, I'm going to sleep." She did not immediately sleep. The incident happened on a Friday at the end of week 3. Belinda was working late. The floor had emptied out around 7, Ha-yoon the last to leave, waving from the elevator with a "don't stay too late" that Belinda had cheerfully ignored. She was deep in a rework of a print concept, the kind of focused state where time stopped mattering, when she heard voices in the corridor. Raised voices. Not arguing exactly. More like the controlled, tense version of a conversation that would have been an argument if it weren't being kept contained by the people having it. She heard Jeon Hyunwoo's voice, low and even, and another voice she didn't recognize, and a third, and something about the cadence of the exchange made her very still in the way that instinct directed. She heard a name, a company name, one she recognized from her research not as a textile company but as something else, something that had appeared in a footnote of an article about a financial investigation 3 years ago, the kind of footnote that sent a different kind of signal. The voices moved past the corridor and down toward the executive floor. Belinda sat with her hands in her lap for a full minute. Then she went back to her print concept, because she was an intern and this was not her building and she had heard nothing, and more importantly, she had a deadline on Monday. She stayed in that position for approximately 45 seconds before her brain, which had apparently decided to stop cooperating, replayed the voices, the name, the particular quality of Jeon Hyunwoo's tone that was not the tone of a man conducting textile business at 7:30 on a Friday. She packed up her things and left. In the lobby, she pushed through the revolving door into the night air and was pulling out her phone to call a cab when a large black SUV pulled to a quiet stop directly in front of her. The window came down. Jeon Hyunwoo looked at her from the back seat. "Miss Michael." "Mr. Jeon? It's late for an intern to be in the building. I had a deadline. I'll have someone take you home. I was going to call a cab. The cab will take 40 minutes. The car will take 15. She looked at the car. She looked at him. Every sensible instinct she owned was doing very clear pointing. She got in the car. They didn't talk for the first 5 minutes. The city moved past the windows in lights and motion, and she looked straight ahead with the practiced calm of a woman who was absolutely not sitting in a car with her billionaire boss, wondering why he was offering her a ride home personally. "You heard something," he said it the same way he said everything, without question mark, without accusation, simply as a statement of what he had concluded. "I don't know what you're talking about. You left the building faster than someone who just finished a deadline. I was hungry. You had food at your workstation. Ha-Yoon's team always orders on Fridays." She turned her head and looked at him fully then. "Are you tracking what I eat?" Something crossed his face, the closest thing she had seen to caught. "I passed the floor earlier." "Right." She looked forward again. Outside, the Han River caught light and held it for a moment before the bridge ended. "I heard voices. I didn't hear anything specific. I went home." A pause. "That's the true version." The silence that followed was different from the earlier silence. It had weight in it. "Do you know who I am?" he said finally. Beyond Han and Co., she thought about the footnote. She thought about the name she had heard. She thought about the receptionist's posture. "I'm starting to form a theory." "A theory?" "I'm from Lagos, Mr. Jeon. I grew up knowing the difference between a business and a business. A building where nobody wastes a movement. Where the exits are always clear. Where the people at the front desk look like they have a second job." She looked at him again. "You're very good at looking like textile." He said nothing for a long moment. The car turned into her neighborhood, which meant whoever was driving already knew where she lived, which was its own interesting data point. "You're not afraid," he said. "I'm cautious. There's a difference." The car stopped outside her building. She reached for the door handle. "Miss Michael." She stopped. "What you theorize," he said, "stays a theory for your own benefit." She looked back at him. In the low light of the car, with the city behind him and the scar catching the street lamp, he looked like exactly the kind of man her mother had warned her about, and exactly the kind of man her own curiosity had always found irresistible. "I understand subtlety," she said. "Lagos raised it." She got out of the car. Upstairs, Said looked up from the couch. "You're home early." "The chairman gave me a ride." Said put down her phone. "Come again. Go to sleep, Said." "Belinda Michael, you sit down right now." She went to her room. She stood in the dark for a moment. Then she sat on the edge of her bed and let herself feel the thing she had been not feeling since the moment she got in the car, which was that she was, despite every sensible fiber in her being, absolutely fascinated by Jeon Hyunwoo, which was the most inconvenient feeling she had ever had in a foreign country, and she had once gotten food poisoning during a fabric sourcing trip to Busan, so the bar for inconvenient was genuinely high. She prayed about it, then she went to sleep. The following week, nothing happened. Hyunwoo was not on the floor. Her work was progressing beautifully. Ha-Yoon had officially greenlit the Afro-Korean line for development. Belinda was flying. Then on Thursday, she got an internal message. Subject, project consultation. Body, conference room B, 4 p.m., no name attached. She went. He was there. Alone. Her portfolio was open on the table. "The Afro-Korean line," he said without preamble. "Ha-Yoon is moving it into development. I know, I'm excited about it. I want to accelerate it. There is a buyer interested in an exclusive Afro-Korean fusion capsule collection. They want to see concepts within 3 weeks. Belinda sat across from him. 3 weeks is tight. You've been working at a pace that suggests 3 weeks is possible. You've been watching my pace. He looked at her steadily. I watch everything in my company. Right. She folded her hands on the table. What resources do I have? Whatever you need. Full creative control, within reason. Define reason. Something flickered at the corner of his mouth. I see you negotiate like you design. I do everything the same way, completely or not at all. He leaned back slightly, and she got the impression that this was a man who was rarely in a meeting where the other person held their ground. She also got the impression from the quality of the silence that he found it interesting rather than irritating. "Full creative control," he said. "I approve the final presentation only. Deal." They worked in that conference room for 2 hours. It was the strangest professional experience of her life, because it was entirely professional. And yet the quality of his attention when she spoke, the way he actually engaged with her ideas rather than waiting for her to finish, was the kind of attention that was hard to find in rooms full of people who were supposed to care. At one point she showed him a reference sketch for the Pajagi panels and he said, "The color story, tell me." And she told him about the colors her grandmother wore to church in Lagos, about the way Korean Pajagi color combinations were traditionally never accidental, always intentional, always carrying meaning, about wanting the capsule collection to carry that same philosophy, that every color choice was a sentence. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting. "My grandmother also had a color philosophy," he said when she finished. "What was it?" "Black for power, red for warning." A brief pause. "Never mix them at the table." She laughed before she could stop herself, a full, genuine laugh, and his expression did something she hadn't seen before, a warmth coming forward beneath the composure. And for one unguarded second he looked like someone who was pleased to have made her laugh. Then the composure returned. They wrapped up the meeting. She gathered her notes. At the door she turned. "Your grandmother sounds like someone I'd have liked." "She would have liked you," he said, "which is rarer." She went back to her floor and sat at her desk and stared at her screen for approximately 4 minutes before Hyun appeared at her elbow with a cup of tea and said, "Your energy is very loud right now," and Belinda said, "Thank you for the tea," and changed the subject. The 3 weeks were intense. She was in early and late. The concepts were expanding. She was pulling from both traditions with a fluency that she hadn't known she had until this project drew it out of her, and there was something alive about the work, the way it felt when you were making the thing you were supposed to make. Hyunwoo checked in twice a week. Not hovering, not managing, more like someone who had given a musician full access to the instrument and kept coming back because the music was interesting. He would sit across from her in the conference room, look at what was new, ask the specific questions that showed he understood, and occasionally say something that reframed a problem she'd been circling. On the second Thursday, she brought jollof rice. She had made a large batch for herself and Said and brought leftovers as office lunch. She was eating at her desk when he walked through the floor, earlier than usual, and stopped. He looked at the container. "That's not from a restaurant nearby." "I made it, jollof rice." He said nothing for a moment. "I know what jollof rice is." "Of course you do." She kept eating. "Would you like some?" He looked at her with the expression of a man who was doing a quiet calculation. "Yes," he said. She got him a container from her tote bag with the particular casualness of a person who had absolutely not hoped this exact moment might happen. He sat at the empty desk next to hers, because every other chair was occupied and also possibly because he wanted to. And he ate jollof rice at 10:30 in the morning while she walked him through the latest concept sketches. And it was so utterly normal, and so utterly not normal at the same time, that Belinda felt a specific kind of warmth settle in the center of her chest, that she immediately tried to classify as professional satisfaction. Said would later say, "You fed him from your personal container, Billy, you're gone." Belinda would say, "I am not gone." She was a little bit gone. The night before the presentation, Belinda was in the office until 11. The final boards were stunning. She knew it with the specific certainty that came from having poured everything right. The color story was there. The cultural dialogue was there. The commercial viability was there. Hyun had cried a little bit looking at the final textile samples, which Belinda took as a good sign. She was packing up when she heard it again. Voices. But this time not in the corridor, closer, and not the contained tension of a business negotiation. This was an argument, somewhere near the service entrance on her floor. Male voices, fast, a name she recognized from a headline she hadn't thought about in weeks. She stood perfectly still, footsteps, moving fast, coming her way. She did the only thing that made sense in the 2 seconds she had, which was to turn off her desk lamp and stay exactly where she was in the dark. 3 figures moved through the floor, past her workstation, toward the emergency stairwell. They didn't see her. The last one through was Jeon Hyunwoo, phone to his ear, face completely still in the way that was different from composed. The stillness of a man in the middle of something that had stopped being a business a long time ago. He stopped at the stairwell door. He looked directly at her workstation. In the dark, she wasn't sure he could see her, but something in his pause suggested otherwise. He held her gaze, or the place where her gaze was, for exactly 3 seconds. Then he pushed through the stairwell door. Belinda sat in the dark for a long time after. She had known what he was. She had theorized it in the car, filed it carefully, made peace with not opening the folder. But watching him move through the floor with that particular purposeful darkness was different from knowing. It moved it from theory to lived. And lived was a different weight. She packed up her things. She left the building. She walked home instead of calling a cab because she needed air. And the night air was cool and the streets were quiet. And she talked to herself in a mixture of English and Yoruba the way she did when she needed to think. And what she was thinking was that she needed to decide something. She could choose to unsee what she had seen. Finish the internship, launch the line, build her career, keep the folder closed. Smart. Clean. Safe. Or she could keep the folder open and admit that somewhere between jollof rice and pajagi panels and a grandmother who wore black for power, she had started to care about Jeon Hyunwoo in a way that was going to cost her sleep. She got home at midnight. Said was awake inexplicably, eating cereal in the dark. "Why are you awake?" I sensed a crisis. "You did not sense a crisis. Your energy has been a crisis for 3 weeks. Belinda sat at the kitchen table. She put her bag down. She looked at her best friend. "I think I like him." Said set down the cereal spoon with the solemnity of a judge. "The chairman." "Yes, whose other business we are not naming." "Yes, Billy." "I know. Do you know, though?" "I know. And I think I like him anyway." Said picked up the spoon again. She ate 1 bite. "Well," she said, "you've never done anything the easy way. Why start now?" The presentation was the next morning. Belinda walked into the boardroom with Hyun and 2 other team members, boards under her arm, dressed in a green and gold wrap dress that paid its own small tribute to the color story she was about to present. The room was full. Senior leadership, the external buyers' representatives, 2 board members she recognized from the company website. Jeon Hyunwoo was at the head of the table. He looked at her when she walked in. She looked at him. Nothing in either of their expressions gave anything away. Professional, clean, perfect. She presented for 40 minutes. She was extraordinary. She told the story of 2 textile traditions separated by continents and unified by philosophy. She showed the color language, the construction logic, the market positioning. She laid out why this was not a gimmick, but a genuine cultural collaboration with commercial staying power. She was precise and passionate and entirely herself. And when she finished, the room was quiet for a moment before the buyer's lead started asking questions, the kind of detailed questions that meant serious interest. At one point, a board member looked toward Hyunwoo and said something in Korean. Belinda caught most of it. The gist was, "Where did you find her?" Hyunwoo looked at her. "She was looking at dye samples," he said in English, looking directly at Belinda. "She noticed what was wrong before I did." The board member looked between them with the comprehension of someone who was catching up to a story that had already been going on for a while. The collection was approved in the room. Full development. Spring launch. Belinda would be named as lead designer, the first intern in the company's 30-year history to receive that designation. Ha-yoon hugged her in the corridor outside and said, "I knew from day one," with the conviction of someone who had genuinely known from day one. 2 hours later, Belinda was back at her desk, head still buzzing, staring at her screen without seeing it, when a message arrived on her phone. Not internal system, personal number, congratulations on today. She stared at it. She typed back, "Thank you." She deleted it. She typed, "How did you get my personal number?" She deleted it. She typed, "The collection did the work." She sent that one. The response came quickly. "The work came from you?" She put the phone face down on her desk. Then she picked it up again because she was a human person with functioning emotions. That evening she was in the small cafe near her building, the one with the good Pat Bingsu, sitting with her sketchbook when the door opened and Jeon Hyunwoo walked in. He saw her immediately. She saw him. He was in a dark coat, no tie, which was the most undone she had ever seen him, and he looked for a moment like a person who had not expected her to be there and was deciding what to do with the fact that she was. He walked over. "Miss Michael, Mr. Jeon," she looked at the cafe around them. "Do you live near here?" "I was in the area. Gangnam to here is not a short in the area." He sat down across from her without being invited, which she noted and which she also did not stop. The cafe owner came over. A small, cheerful woman named Mrs. O, who had been feeding Belinda Pat Bingsu for 2 years, and who now looked at Jeon Hyunwoo with the frank assessment of a woman who had seen many people walk through her door and had developed opinions. Mrs. O looked at Belinda. She looked at Hyunwoo. She said in Korean, "He looks like trouble." Belinda, without looking up from her sketchbook, said in Korean, "I know." Hyunwoo looked at her. "You understood that," he said. "I told you." 2 years? Mrs. O brought 2 pat bingsu without being asked, set them down with the satisfaction of a woman who had decided something, and went back to her counter. They sat with the desserts in front of them for a moment. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "You don't owe me anything. I'm your intern. You've been in my building late at night. You've seen things that weren't meant for your floor. You've been working on a project that has my full attention." He looked at her steadily. "You're not just my intern, and we both know that." The pat bingsu was cold and sweet, and she focused on it for a moment to buy herself composure. "So explain," she said. He did. Not everything. She understood that. There were things that existed in the other folder that would remain closed, and she respected that boundary because she understood from where she came from that some doors protected the person on the inside as much as the one on the outside. But he told her enough about the company and what ran alongside it, about why it ran alongside it, about his father who had built something that refused to stay only one thing, about the weight of inheriting an empire that came with its own gravity field. She listened to the whole thing. "Why are you telling me this?" she said when he finished. "Because you already know the shape of it. And because," he paused in the way he rarely did, the composure thinning slightly, showing something underneath. "I would rather you have the truth than a version I constructed." She looked at him for a long time. "My grandmother," she said, "used to say that a blessing could walk through your door wearing the most inconvenient clothes, that you only knew it was a blessing in hindsight, after you'd decided whether to turn it away." She looked at her pat bingsu. She said the deciding was the whole point. He was quiet. "I grew up in Lagos," she continued. "I moved to Seoul alone at 23 with a portfolio and ambition and absolutely no guarantee. I've been navigating things that weren't designed for me my entire life." She looked up at him. "I'm not afraid of complicated. I'm not a safe choice," he said. He said it plainly, without theater, the way someone states a fact they are not proud of and not ashamed of, simply true. "I know," she said, equally plain. "I'm not asking for safe, I'm asking for real." The cafe was quiet. Mrs. O was pretending to wipe the counter and absolutely listening to every word, which Belinda accepted as the cost of having a neighborhood. Hyunwoo's hand moved across the table and covered hers. Slowly, like someone not accustomed to that kind of gesture but choosing it deliberately. "Jeon, he said quietly. "Absolutely." The warmth in her chest expanded to the rest of her. "Also," she said because she could not entirely help herself, "your grandmother was right about black and red. I used that color combination in panel 7 of the collection." "I know," he said. "I approved it. You approved it knowing. I approved it because the collection required it, and because," the corner of his mouth moved, "I thought you'd want to know someone noticed." She shook her head slowly. "You are so much more than you look, Jeon Hyunwoo. So are you, Belinda Michael." Outside, Seoul moved the way it always did, constant and lit and indifferent to the small, significant things happening inside its windows. Mrs. O brought green tea without being asked. The sketchbook lay open on the table, full of concepts for a collection that had started as an internship and become something else entirely, the way the best things usually did when you gave them room. Belinda Michael had not planned any of this. The chairman with the dangerous smile, the company with 2 faces, the pat bingsu at a neighborhood cafe that would become, quietly, their place. She had not planned the way his attention would feel like the specific quality of light that made color finally make sense. She had not planned that the most inconvenient feeling she had ever had in a foreign country would turn out to be the least inconvenient thing that had ever happened to her. A blessing in disguise, her grandmother would say, and it was exactly that. She just had to stay in the room long enough to see it. The spring collection launched 4 months later. Afro-Korean fusion capsule, lead designer, Belinda Michael. The response was beyond what any projection had modeled. Fashion editors called it a genuine cultural dialogue rendered in fabric. Her mother flew to Seoul for the launch and stood in the front row in a so-oak that matched one of the collection's central textiles, which Belinda had designed with exactly that moment in mind. Afterwards, standing in the quiet of the gallery while the crowd lingered around the displayed pieces, Hyunwoo came to stand beside her. No title between them now. Nothing professional requiring management. Just 2 people looking at the thing they had made possible together. "Your mother approves," he said. "My mother told you that you had good bone structure." "She told me more than that." "I know. I was standing right there and I chose not to stop it." He looked sideways at her. "She also said that in Lagos, a man who shows up consistently is more interesting than a man who shows up perfectly." She has theories. She has wisdom. Belinda looked at the collection on the walls around them. The colors, the stitching, the two traditions speaking to each other across centuries and distance and finding a shared sentence. "It is a blessing," she said softly, partly to him and partly to the grandmother she wished could have seen this room. His hand found hers. "Nado," he said. "Me too." And Seoul held them both in its constant light, the city that had given her everything she hadn't known to ask for, beginning with a textile sample with the wrong dye layering, and a man standing beside her who noticed what was wrong before she said a word. YouTube short script. Belinda had 30 seconds to decide. The boardroom was silent, 12 people in expensive suits watching her. The presentation board she had spent 3 weeks building stood behind her. The external buyer had just asked the question that meant everything, the one that would tell her whether this collection lived or died, and it was not a question about fabric weight or color theory or market positioning. It was about her. "Miss Michael," the buyer's lead said, leaning forward. "Every designer pitches cultural fusion. Why should we believe this one is real?" The room waited. Belinda set down her marker. She looked at the buyer. Then she looked briefly at the man at the head of the table, the one who had given her complete creative control and approved Panel 7 knowing exactly what it meant. The one who had sat at a cafe table with her while Seoul moved outside the window and said one word in Korean that changed the entire temperature of her life. She looked back at the buyer. "Because I didn't design this collection about two cultures," she said. "I designed it about two people, one of whom grew up watching her grandmother treat every scrap of fabric like it carried memory, the other of whom was taught that color is language and nothing is wasted." She looked at the boards. "When two people who understand that find each other across every kind of distance, that is not fusion. That is recognition." The room was completely still. Then the buyer's lead picked up her pen and started writing. How did two people separated by continents, cultures, and one very complicated business end up making the most celebrated collection of the year? The full story of Belinda and Hyunwoo is on the channel right now. Go watch it. You will not regret it. There's your complete 30-minute prose script and the companion short. The short ends on the pitch presentation moment, which is emotionally high and professionally dramatic, and feeds directly back to the full story. Let me know if you want adjustments to tone, pacing, or any scene.